of UFOs.
And you say we recovered alien bodies from that incident, right?
4 from that particular crash, yes.
And what'd they do with them?
They autopsied them. Dr. Detlef Bronk was the chief surgeon, so to speak. He was the one that named them EBEs. It stands for Extraterrestrial Biological Entities. We captured 3 live EBEs. They were numbered in their order of capture: EBE-1, EBE-2, and EBE-3.
Where did we capture? Where did this happen?
In different crashes. EBE-1 lived with an Air Force colonel between 1949 and 1952. The EBEs are kept in an electromagnetic facility called a YY-2. It was designed by a Dr. Eric Wang, who worked directly for Dr. Kissinger, who has been in this cover-up since the very beginning. The reason they had to create an electromagnetic facility is the fact that the EBEs are so advanced. They're at least a 500 million years advanced from us, and probably more. They can move by thought.
Move by thought.
And they can also disappear. But they can't move by thought through electromagnetic facilities. So they built this facility. There was 2, one in Los Alamos and one either at Edwards or up at the test site.
At Groom Lake, Nevada.
At Groom Lake. Now there's still one EBE still living, EBE-3, and there is a videotape that eventually is going to be released to the public, and it's an interview with him. As hard as that may sound, as hard as that may be to believe, there is a videotape of an interview with EBE-3.
And what is this language that the interviewers are?
I haven't seen the tape, so I don't know. But on this trip I told you I took gathering all this information, a guy in Albuquerque handed me 25 secret CIA memos. And if anything can be humorous in all of this, one of these memos, in the body of the text, it said, by the way, EBE-3 wants to see the ocean. We better make the arrangements or he'll disappear again. So while he couldn't get out of this facility, he could make himself disappear and cause him a lot of trouble.
Now, can they exist among us? Is that what you're saying, or do they have to have this special environment?
They have special environment, special air. It's my understanding they can only last about. What I tell you tonight is true beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's not important that you believe it now. Just listen, file away. In the next few months, maybe even years, you'll wake up one fine day and say to yourself, the son of a gun was right. Of course, by then it'll be far too late. So here's the bottom line. Listen up. Number 1, the United States government, since July 7th, 1947, has collected and has in its possession at least 15, but probably closer to 25 flying saucers belonging to alien civilizations from far beyond our solar system. At least 3 were undamaged, and the Air Force has tried to fly at least one of them under a secret program begun in 1972 and continuing to this date at the Nevada test site and Kwajalein Island in the Pacific. Number 2, the United States government has in cryogenic storage at least 30, but maybe closer to 100 alien bodies representing as many as 3 different civilizations from far beyond our solar system. The bodies were or are kept at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Homestead Air Force Base, and there is an alien corpse display at the CIA facility at Langley. At least 3 aliens were captured alive, and 1 is still living at Los Alamos, New Mexico. Their nomenclature or names, they were called EBEs, Extraterrestrial Biological Entities. They were named that by Dr. Detlef Bronk, 6th president of the Johns Hopkins University, who was one of the original MJ-12s. So they called them EBEs, and the ones that they captured were in consecutive order: EBE-1, EBE-2, EBE-3. EBE-1 was captured in 1949, died in 1952, lived with an Air Force colonel. I don't know about EBE-2, EBE-3. I don't know when he was captured, but he's still alive. Number 3, at least 1 million Americans, and probably far more, have been abducted since the early 1940s. These abductions last about 2 hours and are carried out for 3 purposes. The first is to insert a tiny transmitter the size of a BB into the brain of the subject in order to monitor certain biological functions, the specifics of which are unknown to us at this time. The transmitters are implanted at the human beings at about the age of 4 or 5. They are picked up again and checked at about 12 or 13, and about the age of 18, the implant is sometimes removed. Some of you have seen that book, Communion, written by Whitley Strieber. It tells a A very fascinating story. He was at the World Life Expo down there in Los Angeles about 6 weeks ago, and he carries around his x-rays with his implants in there, signed by his doctor, 2 unidentified 3mm spherical objects in his brain. The second purpose of the abductions is to program the individual through post-hypnotic suggestion. On the basis of over 300 cases we've discovered so far, we now know that some sort of enormously important event may occur in the next 1 to 4 years, and the abductees have been post-hypnotically programmed to proceed to a certain place and perform a certain function during that event. In some cases, the abductees have been shown what appears to be similar to a little TV channel changer, and advised that at the proper time they will remember what the unit is for and how to work it. Under our best hypnotic techniques, we are unable to find out when or what. There is evidence that the third reason for the abductions is interbreeding or crossbreeding experiments where we have been crossbred with the aliens. In his book Intruders, Bud Hopkins tells about his 2.5-year investigation of Kathy Davis of Indianapolis, who was inseminated by aliens and produced 7 crossbreeds. Number 4, during the past 13 years, over 14,000 cattle throughout the U.S., Canada, and South America have been mutilated in a completely grotesque manner. The mutilations have been investigated by many state and federal agencies, including the FBI.
You know, the times you went up there with the Lazar looking for craft yourself.
We went up twice. The first time was not, the first time he knew it was going to fly. He knew it was going to fly just after sunset, and that was March 22nd, 1989. And we drove up there with Gene Huff, and we had my motorhome. And we pulled in just as it was getting dark, and I was setting up the Celestron scope. And they were outside looking. They said, "Here it comes." And you can see this real bright light coming up from behind the range. So I got the Celestron scope hooked up and got it focused in, and had, maybe about 15-20 seconds. I don't have the scope here, but it's 8 inches, and it's a huge scope, and the disc, pretty much filled the field of view, and it was tilted like about 30 degrees. It was kind of yellow-orange, and it was kind of diffusing, and I just saw it just as it started to go back down the mountain. And we waited a couple hours that night and didn't see it again. The next Wednesday night was March 29th, and I was on a flight with American Transair stuck in Minneapolis. And that's the night I phoned Bob and said, "What's going on?" He said, "We're going fishing." And I thought, oh, neat. And that was his code word for we're going up to Groom Lake. Well, several weeks later, when they took him up to Indian Springs, and with a gun pointed in his head, they said, "Oh, that comment about going fishing, boy, it sure took us a long time to figure that out." They were pretty sarcastic over it. They were taping both our phones here. Anyway, that was the night that they got the film of the saucer stitching its way across the sky, the night sky that George Knapp and a few others used. Incidentally, the first night we were so excited that the video camera stayed right on the bumper of the motorhome. It didn't get pointed at it. I don't know why that happens, but it does. Anyway, the third night was April 6, 1989, and that's when Gene and me and Bob's wife, and his wife's sister went up there. We rented a car because I had blown the transmission on the motorhome, and Bob just had a 2-place 280Z, and I had just my truck, so we rented a car to go up there. There was no mystery about that, which people make a big deal about, but we just had no other way to get up there. We drove in, we had in the back Geiger counters, film, cameras, videos, everything. And as we drove down Groom Lake Road at that time, we thought that the legal cutoff was that road that comes down from Mailbox Road. And so when we got there, I said, "Look, let's just stay here, and even if we get a mile closer, it's not going to make that much difference in the film." And they said, no, let's go on. So we went another couple hundred feet, and we had the lights out, and I was leaning out the window, telling them to go left and right. We stopped, and a couple sets of headlights, you know. As we stopped, a couple sets of headlights came on in front of the vehicle, and we decided to run because I thought we were in illegal territory. As it turns out, we weren't, and we could have all avoided a lot of trouble. And Bob never would have lost his job, and I never would have lost mine if we'd have just, you know, sat there and let him walk up to us. But the fact is, we thought we were in illegal territory, and we turned around and we started going 90 miles an hour down the road with them in hot pursuit. We almost made it to the highway, but they had sent another Bronco around and cut us off. And when we saw him coming down the road, we stopped. Bob ran out in the desert. I jumped out and started setting up the telescope, and that's when the first Bronco came to a halt. And I ran up and threw my hands against the top of the car, and I said, you know, holy smokes, you guys aren't dopers, are you? You scared the hell out of us out here. And they get out, and they all were armed with machine guns, and they stand around. There was like 4 or 5 of them, and they stood at port arms around us. And the one guy said, what are you guys doing up here? And we said, oh, we're just looking at the stars. He said, well, why did you run? And I said, like I said, we thought you were dopers. And he said, well, we're not. We need to see some identification, and we showed him some, we had to give him our social security and the driver's license, and he ran it, and all this process took about 30 minutes. And he said, we can't kick you off the range here because this is BLM land. He said, but we'll make it awful uncomfortable if you stay here. So they turned around and left. We stood behind the car waiting for about 15 minutes, and then Bob comes out of the desert. And we start talking about all the stuff that we'd done, the 3 weeks before, the 2 weeks before, all the stuff that we had done that night, all the preparation, everything, not realizing that all the time they had just gone about maybe 100 meters down the road and were filming us in infrared and listening to us with a parabolic microphone, all of which was made readily apparent to Bob the next day when he was taken up to security. But anyway, we had no idea this was going on, even though there were several real good clues. And one was, one of the guys down there dropped a scope. And we not only heard it, but we saw it, and we saw a cigarette. But nobody ever decided, you know, I don't even know why we didn't go down and investigate. But the fact is we didn't. So anyway, we packed up our stuff and went out on the road. And as we got to the highway, we were stopped by the Lincoln County Sheriff, Doug Lamoureux, who has since become a good friend. And he kept us there for an hour. He wanted to see in the trunk, but we wouldn't let him in there, mainly because that was where the gun was that Bob had taken out in the desert. But anyway, it seems that Lamoureux knew exactly what was going on. He wanted to know why there was 5 people in the vehicle now and only 4 on the test site, and he wanted to know where the gun was. So obviously there was communication between the security forces on the test site and the sheriff. Anyway, we stood there for an hour. Nobody said anything. And finally, to bring this all to a halt, Bob decided to confess that it was his gun, and it was in the trunk. And I saw him walking to go ahead and do it. And at that split second, Doug said, okay, look, here's what we're going to do. I've been advised to release you guys, but we don't want to ever see you here again, ever. And he let us go. And it was a real quiet ride home that night. And the next day, Bob's boss, Dennis Mariana, called him up and said, Bob, I'm going to pick you up. Don't go to the airplane. I mean, don't go to the EGJ. He picked him up. He drove him up to Indian Springs, which is this site of the entire security for the test site. And they actually pulled him out of the car with a gun in his head and a gun in his ear and said, Bob, when we gave you the security clearance and told you this was a secret, it didn't mean you could tell all your friends about the flying saucers. Now, do you want to work with us or not? And he was non-committal. And for the next few days, he was making up his mind. And I think the reason he decided not to continue working up there was the fact that the last 2 trips that he made up to Groom Lake, he could remember flying up and flying back, but he couldn't remember what they did. And the mind control program that they have for the people that are involved up there in very, very classified programs is disconcerting. You can remember everything you have to when you're up there and working and everything, but when you come back, you can't remember anything. All you can remember is getting in the airplane and coming back. And that was real disconcerting to Bob, who has an IQ of way over 200.
And the tunnels that are going from the Groom Lake facility
It goes out across and underneath the Tikaboo Valley, as I understand it. They're 70 feet across.
I don't know too much about the tunnels, but we did find a new base out there. It was kind of interesting. I heard about it in 1983-84. A friend of mine was in construction, and he was up there working on TTR, Tonopah Test Range. And I was pumping him, and I said, hey, anything else going on up there? He says, yeah, as a matter of fact, there is. He said, over on another range, they're building something. Then I talked to a guy who drove a fuel truck up there, and he said, yeah, he said, once I was delivering fuel up to TTR, and he said, where we come in at Gold Reed, he said, I had to wait for something like an hour for a procession of cement trucks going by. He said, it was just unbelievable how many cement trucks there were. And the facility is called Sandia, and I'll show you where it is. It's in Paiute Mesa, and they started in 1980, and they finished in 1987. I did a little story down here on Channel 3 about it, and a guy called in after the newscast and said, yes, I'm from, originally from El Paso, and I was hired to work on Sandia. And he said, yes, we started in 1980, finished 1987. It's totally underground. You can't see anything above ground, and believe me, I've tried, even though the closest point you can get to it on the...
You're going to show me the picture? Or where?
Which ones?
The location of it.
Yeah. The closest you can get to it is 25 miles, and it's a long ways. The guys that fly into it say that when you land there, and I'm talking about EG&G Special Projects, they take the passengers in and out, they say you can't see the runway until the last second. And then they land, they're not allowed to ever get out of the airplane, like up at Groom Lake, they can go in the cafeteria. At this place, they have to sit in the cockpit. They're not allowed to get out. When the passengers get out, he said they just go behind a little knoll and disappear. Now, I'm sure there's stairways or whatever, but there's nothing. You can't see anything up there. It's very well hidden. And during the Gulf War, a friend of mine talked about it. I think this technology of hiding runways came about in 1980 because I heard about it then, but I didn't have any examples during the Gulf War. During the Gulf War, I worked for a cargo company that did a lot of flying into the Gulf. And although this didn't happen to me, it happened to a friend of mine where he got down to Cairo and got just south of Cairo about 100 miles and got vectored by the American Airwax for delivery of what was in the airplane. And it was at night, and they couldn't see anything, and he was told when to put his flaps down, when to put his gear down, and at 500 feet, lights came on, and he landed there, they unloaded, took off, and went on his way. Since we navigate by inertial guidance, he knew exactly where he was, and he had occasion, like a week later, to come over the same spot, and it was just the middle of the desert. There wasn't a trace of anything, nothing. So they have really good capability of hiding runways. Now, people think Groom Lake is a one-of-a-kind facility, and it is a very big secret facility. But like in 1980, there was 30 other what they call AXOs, aircraft access only. You can't drive in it. In 1980 there was 30. So today there may be more. There may be more. There may be less. But this Las Vegas, this Highway 95. This is 93. This is Mercury. This is Beatty. These are the places where I was trying to hike up to. They were the closest to the border that you could legally look into Sandia. Here's Sandia. When they built it, they put this extra little security range around here. There's absolutely no indication that anything is there except an enormous power line going right into there, and it just stops now.
Coming from where?
Coming from down here, maybe down as far as here. This whole area is NRDA, where they originally built the nuclear rocket. All that facility is there. This is the famed Yucca Mountain where they want to store stuff. This is Groom Lake. That's the new strip there. TTR is up there. The orientation of the runway is there. On December 23rd, I was flying a mail contract in a DCA, and I came by this way, just to the north of here, going into Oakland, and I tuned in Dreamland 120.35. As a matter of fact, if you want to listen to it going in and out, I can put it on the scanner, because I got a big antenna that goes here. So it was about 5:30 in the afternoon, real cloudy, real dark and everything. So I just turned on 123.35 and said, Dreamland, Dreamland, John Lear and Bob Lazar wish you a Merry Christmas. And do you know that nobody answered me?
The Frankenstein factories where they create alien-looking.
There's no
beings.
question about it. I had a friend that worked up at the test site who went to work in the 80s, the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, over in Saudi Arabia for one of the major contractors over there, Osama bin Laden. And he had a lot of strange things happen. He came back, you know, and before I got into this in 7 years ago, I was relatively straight. I mean, I, you know, did my stint for the CIA. I believed in, you know, God and apple pie and Chevrolet and, you know, flying saucers to me were, I mean, just, you couldn't even mention it. You know, I wasn't interested then. So we sat down in the early 80s at my house over on the other side of town, and we're guys, you know, what's going on, and nothing, and there was kind of a lull in the conversation. He says, John, what do you know about, I can't think of the word.
We were talking about genetic engineering.
What is it when they create a human?
Cloning?
Oh, yeah, he said,
Cloning.
He says, John, what do you know about cloning? And I said, you know, nothing. I mean, this was so far out to me. And he said, just let me tell you, it's all real and it's all happening. And this is from Cecil McMains, a guy who's so down to earth, who worked on the SR-70.